For 45 minutes against Legia Warsaw, Chelsea didn't look at their best, until Enzo Maresca pulled the trigger on a game-winning switch. Chelsea's setup was too passive, too predictable, and it showed in the first half. We initially set up in our standard 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3, but as usual we kind of shifted this in possession to some variant of a 3-4-3. Now, we obviously do this by inverting one of the fullbacks. In this case, it was Malo Gusto on the left-hand side who was going to invert. And we see him come into the middle, and we've kind of seen two different variants of this, right? We can see either this box midfield, like I've put out here, with the four players playing here with the two holders, or what we saw in this game, and something we've been seeing a lot more commonly recently, where we leave one player alone in this 6 role and then we rotate everyone to play this diamond instead, with obviously Malo Gusto and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall operating as these two 8s, with Cole Palmer in the 10. Legia Warsaw were set up in this 5-4-1 formation, a very, very defensive setup that is hard to break down for any team, and Chelsea were no exception. Enzo Maresca's system is very reliant on winning individual battles, but this is especially important in the wide areas of the pitch with our wingers. Now, they are usually tasked with trying to win 1v1s, try and make 1v1s, and then beat their opposite number in those 1v1s, and then go through and create chances either for themselves or for their teammates. Now, as you can kind of see here, from how the two teams have lined up, there just isn't much opportunity for our wingers to create 1v1 opportunities. Now we see over here, obviously they can quite easily double up on our wingers out wide here, and even if we get support from one of the midfield men, they still have to contend with these two players and this midfielder who's come across to mark this man, and there's always going to be a player disadvantage for us. And despite Jadon Sancho and Tyreek George on these two flanks trying to force these 1v1s and trying to kind of take on their men, ultimately they were crowded out and kind of just forced to, when they're on the ball, just play the ball backwards into our midfield. Now we see, because of how little possession Legia were getting, we were actually pushing our midfielders really high up here. We're playing them playing almost in a 3-1-3-3 at times, with James being this lone player in the middle here. And yeah, so a lot of the time when they kind of failed to do this and failed to get the ball past this double up and past this massive amount of bodies, they would just have to pass the ball back. Now, usually when teams set up in this defensive way and there is no avenue to get through from the wide areas, instead what usually happens is that your wide players will just swing the ball into the box via crosses, via early crosses, to try and create something in the box. But of course, with us playing this particular setup, we don't have a 9. We do not play with a 9. We're playing with this kind of false 9 with Nkunku, and later Tyreek George, who moves into this position, and he's just not big enough of a box presence, and he's also just crowded out by so many players that putting the ball into the box is basically just giving the ball back to the opposition, and there's no real reason for us doing this. And though there was some effort from our midfielders, mainly Malo Gusto and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, to kind of get up in support and try and get into the box as well, again, those two are not the greatest at getting on the end of things, so swinging the ball in is kind of not very fruitful. We did see some opportunities for Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall in particular to kind of get on the end of things, but that didn't really create any more real chances, more so just half chances. And for the most part, that's kind of the story of the first half, is us not being able to make inroads from our wide areas where we'd like to, having to play the ball backwards into our midfield and recycling possession, ultimately being quite solid and not being able to give anything away to the opposition, who were basically unable to make any kind of inroads on us whilst we were controlling the ball. But ultimately we didn't really create enough in the first half. But what about that switch in the second half? Well, there are a few changes at halftime from Enzo Maresca, and I'm not just talking about the substitutions of Noni Madueke, Colwill and Cucurella, who eventually came on for Reece James. There was a fundamental change to the formation in the second half that really tilted the balance in our favour. Instead of this 3-4-3 with the diamond in the midfield, we actually push an extra man up and play a kind of 2-2-5-1 formation, with Acheampong deciding to be more in the midfield and us leaving these two centre-backs of Levi Colwill and Badiashile alone here as a 2. Now, it looks a bit funky when we actually push the team up here, but what you kind of see is we see the two holding midfielders, and this gives license for one of them, depending on which side the ball goes to. More often than not, the ball was going to the right hand side in this case. the right-sided kind of centre mid to be an extra option up front. And obviously he was kind of interchanging Josh Acheampong with Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall and Madueke on this right side, and we get these 3 players over here now against this 2. So we actually get the advantage here, and obviously they have the extra centre back here who's kind of matches up, but what this does is it stops that 2v1 on Madueke where he's kind of, or in the first half it was Jadon Sancho, instead of it being this 2v1 and him being unable to kind of drive at players, what this does is it allows whoever is in this second role, whether this be Acheampong or sometimes he would kind of stay as the deeper man and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall would come over here. It allows this man to make runs in behind or just be an annoyance here or be an option to pass to, which keeps the attention of this midfielder on him. Now what this does is it creates this 2v2, which is just a kind of overcomplicated way of saying that these are 2 1v1s now. And that's what we've wanted the entire time. And obviously we know how good Madueke is. We know that he can take on his man, he can burst around players if he wants to, he can go inside if he wants to, and it really opened the game up for us having this extra man here now, because the Legia players couldn't just double up on Madueke and just say, well, come on then, try and get past us. Instead they had to kind of be wary of Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall making this run or going inside or being free, so this player has to be occupied. And when Madueke does eventually get into these types of positions, it's really easy for him to either try and put the ball into the box or go around his man, as I said before, and put the ball across the face of goal. He could create at will basically, and that's something that we couldn't really do in the first half because we didn't have the extra man here. And the same thing was happening on the opposite side with Jadon Sancho and Malo Gusto / eventually Marc Cucurella, who would come into this position as well. And obviously we know how good Marc Cucurella is at supporting his winger. But the same thing happens here, right, where we get Malo Gusto being an annoyance, trying to run into the box, trying to get in behind. I think this was one of Malo Gusto's better games this season, I would like to suggest. And obviously with Reece James being on the opposite side, when he would go forward to kind of support this, or Nkunku would come over to kind of support this right hand side, Acheampong would then fill into the holding role and be that defensive player. And again, we still have these 2 players back rather than the 3 players with just the holder here. And because we get this overload of men on this side, we can then easily fashion chances for Jadon Sancho to do what he does best and try and take on his opposite number, get inside, cut inside and try and get shots away, or try and pass the ball to his teammates. And yeah, we kept creating chances from both sides, mainly the right side, but both sides were now available to do this. And when you look at all 3 goals that we score in this game, they all come from this same scenario. And I'll put some examples on screen so you can see them here. One of our wide players just kind of getting the chance to run at his man and put a ball into the box. The first one that George scores is off of the back of some great work from Noni Madueke down the right hand side. It ultimately falls at James to take the strike on goal before he came off, but it's that initial danger from the wing that makes Legia unable to clear their lines completely and gives us the effort on goal that George eventually tidies up. The third goal is similar, but from the opposite side. Jadon Sancho gets the opportunity to run at his fullback as the surrounding defenders are all occupied by George, Nkunku and Cucurella. With this freedom and space, he bursts past his marker to cut the ball across, and Noni Madueke drifts in at the back post for a tap-in. Although the second goal is more down to a goalkeeping error, allowing us to get men forward more quickly, it still comes from Jadon Sancho on that left-hand side once more, running into the area and neatly passing it to Madueke again to score his first. The interesting thing to me though about this setup is that despite the lack of creativity in the first half, we did create some chances, and all of them came from that same principle that we've spoken about, committing an extra man up the pitch. I think the best example is the Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall strike from outside the area that was saved. This opportunity only arises because Josh Acheampong on this right hand side of the defence decides to get nice and high up to join the attack, leaving the 2 other centre backs and creating a similar scenario to what we've spoken about for the second half. He occupies a player, and that allows the attempt on goal to finally come. This is relevant because most people would attribute our second half resurgence simply on players like Madueke and others having good individual performances, and whilst that is true and they did have good performances, this shows that more so the switch to push an extra man forward was what really transformed the game, with Enzo Maresca showing some more of that tactical nuance that we know he's able to. If you enjoyed this tactical breakdown and want to see more Chelsea analysis, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want something else to watch, perhaps check out this video in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.